Solar PV Cast by Shift, a podcast exploring solar energy and the role it plays in improving our lives and our planet. Here's your host, Chris Palliser.
Yes, it is the Solar PV Cast. Thanks for joining us once again. It's brought to you by Shift. We power change for all your solar and energy storage needs. Make sure to visit shift.ca. I am Chris, and when it comes to solar PV, the east coast of Canada, specifically Nova Scotia, is definitely one of the leaders in the country, and that's in large part to the nonprofit organization known as Solar Nova Scotia. Joining us from Solar Nova Scotia is longtime board member and secretary Dan MacKay. Welcome to the Solar PV Cast, Dan.
Well, thank you, Chris. Great to be here.
Now, when we do this, I like to kind of set this up with a little context, a little history. Could you tell us about your personal journey towards solar? When did the light go off, no pun intended, in your mind that solar could be the way of the future? And how did you find your way to Solar Nova Scotia?
Well, Chris, it didn't, frankly. I mean, as a teenager, I was as interested in alternative energy as anyone. As a teen, I bought this really great book. Let me see if I can just put my hand on it right. Yeah, one hand. As a teen, I got this really great book published, I think, by Mother Earth News called Soft Tech. And this is all about, it's published by Coevolution Quarterly in 1978 or 1980 or something. But we'll talk about this a little bit later, Chris. But like one of the wacky things is that you can go through this 40-year-old book, which itself has at the time 15 and 10-year-old technology described in it, and say, hey, that's really cool. I'd really like to do that. That's kind of interesting. Huh. Like for example, there's like 4 pages in here about a motor that runs on hot water called a nitinol motor. And people, every now and then, someone will come to you and say, hey, look, here's this new thing. Look, a nitinol motor runs on hot water. And it's like, yeah, that is a cool thing. And you bring out the book and show them that is a cool new thing. When it was invented in 1957, it was extremely cool, and it still is. Anyway,
cool it's still, you can still relate it to now. 1978, that book, Soft Tech. So you found this book, you started reading and thought, huh.
Well, and that puts me in the scale of the same interest as anyone else. I really came to solar in a completely 100% accidental way. My partner at the time was named Norval Collins. And Norval's a pretty unusual name. There's a place name in Ontario called Norval. There's an artist, a famous Indigenous artist named Norval Morrisseau, but there aren't a lot of Norvals in the world. And a person working for Norval named Joanne Cook was hanging out with the environmental crowd. They met at a pub every Friday night. We met at a pub every Friday night for 40 years. Anyway, Joanne has no strong objections to bending the elbow. So she was down at the pub with the solar guys. And the chair at the time was named Norval Balch, whose dad was a famous photographer in New Brunswick in the 1800s and early 1900s. Anyway, Norval Balch was the chair. And so Joanne came back from the Friday night and said, hey, to her boss, Norval Collins, wouldn't it be cool to have 2 Norvals at the same table at the bar on a Friday night? And everybody said, yeah, that would be cool. And so we joined the Solar Nova Scotia group at the pub the next Friday night. And it was a nice bunch of people. It was an interesting time. And the format, Chris, was... this was 40 years ago. This is before the internet. This is before Google. This is before web pages. And it was not easy to get information about stuff. And so what they had figured out years earlier in the late 1970s was that they were all spending a great deal of time on the phone explaining what solar energy was to people, over the phone. And so you'd spend an hour on the phone with a person, hang up, phone would ring, and you'd talk for another hour with someone else. And so this is obviously not tenable because these people were volunteers. So they decided to start a regular. You've heard of Lunch and Learn. Well, this was Solar Sup and Share, and so we had supper starting at there. I mean, we did the same thing for 40 years, starting at 5 o'clock, I think, at one pub after another because pubs come and go. And until usually about 7 o'clock, sometimes 8, sometimes longer, depending on the number of people and the kind of questions. And people would just share their experiences. People would ask questions, others would listen, others would learn, others would share their experiences or their expertise. And so that's how I got involved via beer and burgers.
Amazing. I mean, it's so great that at that time when it was limited knowledge, you all found this passion and you were so committed to it for 40 years. You've been having the supper.
Yeah, well, and in the 80s and 90s, there were huge numbers of people there, right? There would be some nights when we would have 20 or 30 people at a gigantically long table at the pub. It was an amazing
Wow.
experience.
Yeah, all thanks to the
And
sun.
and and you would say, well, that 20, 30 people, that's cool. But this was every Friday night, right? This is not a
Yeah.
special occasion. This is a very ordinary occasion. And so you kind of got into the habit. And let me tell you, there's something really special about meeting the same group of people at the same time at a pub every week. You get to develop a particularly intimate relationship with these people.
Well, you see them more than family and other close friends, the
Absolutely. Yep,
1 week
absolutely.
commitment. That's wonderful. So
And
so you've been a part of it since nearly the beginning. What exactly is your role with Solar Nova Scotia?
well, two big things. I every society, that is to say, every NGO, call it, every NGO needs a certain number of roles. They need someone who kind of makes sure everything gets done that we decide. You need a bunch of people to help make decisions. You need someone to keep track of the money, and you need someone to keep track of what gets said and what gets promised and what decisions get made. That position is called the secretary, and that was me. So it just means when you're at a meeting, someone has to take notes about who promised to do what and what decisions were made. Because you make a decision like, oh, look, we're going to spend $200 on this radio ad, and then everybody sits around and says, "Yep, that's a good choice." All the board decides that, and then 6 months later, we're spending this $200. Goes, hey, what the hell? Who decided we were going to spend $200? Well, there's a standard way to answer that. Anyway, that's what the secretary does. When the web came along, it was a natural transition for me to also become webmaster. So I've been doing that as well. I would love to shed that role because Chris, it is the most thankless job of anything. It's more thankless than taking notes at meetings. So if someone wants to take over as webmaster, right? Because with every organization, Chris, you get this thing that's like, oh, we're going to build a web page. We're going to build a web page. Everybody's excited. Everybody chips in. Everybody helps. You spend $15,000. Woo, web page, and then you have a party to celebrate the new web page launch party. And then 2 months later, it's okay. We need to put this new piece of information on the website. Who's going to do that?
Yeah.
And then a year later, someone starts complaining that there's no new information on the website. And they're like, yeah, you're right. There is no new information. How about if you just give me some? Oh, crickets. Anyway, it's a thankless job.
Gotcha.
But someone has to do it. And so that's the nature of the job.
Awesome. I'm just thinking of these suppers. You said they're still happening. Can anyone join these suppers? Like, what is membership for Solar Nova Scotia? How does one become a member? And do you get to go have a burger and a beer still?
Sure do. When COVID started, we canceled the regular Friday night meetings. So we haven't done that again. But if someone wants to get together, we certainly do. If someone wants to join, all of our contact info is on the website, solarns.ca. Running in a cool content manager called Drupal, by the way. Totally recommend it. Go Drupal. But this whole thing of getting together because people want information is gone for two reasons. First of all, there's the big Google. And second of all, we now have an abundance of contractors, Chris, that can help you with anything. And this is what was different. 30 years ago, there were 2 or 3 people in the entire province who would be doing contracting, any kind of solar contracting. There were a couple of people designing homes. There were a couple of people installing thermal, and for extremely rich people, installing PV.
Well, extremely rich. Yeah, of course. Back then, 40 years ago, my goodness, the cost of solar, I think, is $115 per watt or something in the 70s.
There you go. And so you can see why there were 2 things that made a great deal of sense. One was conservation, which of course is a wonderful kind of hippie concept, which has evolved out of the 1960s, conservation. And then conservation got a boost in the 1970s when the world was running out of oil for the first time. But for environmentally conscious people, Chris, conservation has always been a priority. And so you can see that at $185 a watt, you're going to build a home that doesn't use very much power at all. That means not running resistance heating for anything, and it means collecting thermal because thermal was relatively cheap. Thermal was quite cheap. Now, of course, starting about 12 or 13 or 14 years ago, thermal has kind of flatlined. The cost of thermal has flatlined maybe for the last, who knows, 40 years. But the cost of PV has just and it's just like flatlined at, what would you say? Something like 80 or 90 cents a watt installed?
I would hope so. Right now here, I mean, where we're at, we're I think around 230, 240 a watt.
Oh,
installed, but it's way less than it was for sure. Which is why so many people are doing it. And your ROI now on a 25-year system is 10, 11, 12 years, especially with the grants and the federal loans.
Well, this is just it, Chris. I mean, my entire life, I've been helping people calculate the payback period for either thermal, and let's face it, an off-grid home or a home specifically built to collect solar energy and be thrifty about it. It's going to cost a little bit more. So my entire life up until about 5 or 6 years ago has been convincing people that although the payback period is 20 or 30 years, maybe you're going to be in your home that long. Maybe think of your grandchildren. Think of your children and grandchildren and saving the planet for them. And all these, ways of twisting people's arms to get them to buy solar stuff. Okay, what happened 4 years ago? We got a bunch of rebates. We got a bunch of financing options. The price of solar came down dramatically. And so all of a sudden, starting, how many years ago was it? Like 3 years ago? All of a sudden, you put in a PV system and it starts making more money than it costs that month. Yeah. Right?
It's like unreal.
It's like the entire reason, my entire sales, because I did do sales for a while. I did installation for a while. I did sales for a while. This entire sales pitch, has changed from a long, thoughtful, heartfelt conversation across a kitchen table to shut up and take my money.
Well, that's the beautiful thing of it. It's not even a sales pitch now. You literally just put the information in front of people. That's all you do. And they see that it makes sense, which is really exciting. What is it specifically that Solar Nova Scotia does? Like the mantra, the goal as an organization, is it still really focused on just educating the public?
We're kind of in transition. Certainly, we've been doing education for most of our time. We are thinking of becoming a little bit more representative of the the industry, of the installation industry. But there's nothing decided on that. And one of the things, because we've been around so long, is that we have this immense amount of credibility with everyone, right? And so you can go to the government and they're like, yeah, we want to hear what Solar Nova Scotia says. And you can go to the Utilities Review Board and they go, yeah, well, if Solar Nova Scotia says it, it's probably true.
Yeah.
We're held in very, very high regard by industry. For a bunch of
at the
reasons.
table. A seat at
And
the
we have a seat
table
at
with anything. Yeah.
Chris, we have a seat at every table. It's a very enviable position.
In every pub.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's how I found out about you guys, and I thought, we need to get these guys on the Solar PV Cast, because anytime you put the words solar and Nova Scotia in any sort of search platform, the first thing that comes up is Solar Nova Scotia. And being a nonprofit organization, that's wonderful. And like you said, that speaks to the credibility that you guys provide.
Well, it also speaks to us having had a website since very shortly after the web was invented. Because one of the other things that I've did was help build the internet in Nova Scotia and Canada, right? So we had Solar Nova Scotia has been a volunteer job for everyone all this time. No one has ever gotten paid, ever.
Wow.
It would be
your passion. And
it would be great if that changed. And we're thinking, wouldn't it be great to have an executive director at some point? But no, the whole organization has been run by what we call a working board. And in NGO talk, NGO means non-governmental organizations. In NGO talk, that means a board that doesn't just sit back and make decisions and pay someone to realize them. It means a board that gets out there. And if someone says, well, I think we should talk to the deputy minister, it means that one of us talks to the deputy minister.
Yeah, wow.
We've been volunteer all this time, and my paid job was building the internet. And so as soon as the internet was up, and so as soon as www was created, we had a web page up. And obviously that the longevity of that web page feeds the search engine optimization engines.
Right. Yeah, of course. I mean, and anyone in Nova Scotia, I can imagine, who wants to go solar and, wants to make sure they're getting the right information, they're going to go to you guys first, because, you're not a business installer. You're not trying to get money from them. You're just trying to show them the way. But
right.
Speaking of, you guys being a part of the internet early on, I know that you did a very cool project, a solar home inventory project that you're quite proud of, and it lists at the time most of the solar installs in Nova Scotia. Is that correct?
No, it was a tiny sliver.
Okay.
The goal was to get a significant number. The goal was to get like 75 or 80%. And we did a thing. We had a solar spotting contest, and people took pictures and sent in the coordinates of, whatever coordinates they had of various homes. And we entered them in a contest, and someone won something. But this is all 25 years ago. I forget the details. Yeah. And then I built an online database of it.
Very cool.
And there were two goals for this thing, Chris. The first was to have a showcase showing that solar worked, and of course these were all solar mostly solar thermal, but also we were talking about any low carbon solution to domestic living. So people could identify these things. And so one goal was to show that this low carbon living worked, and the other was it was going to be a project to calculate how much the solar people in Nova Scotia, how much carbon they didn't put in the atmosphere. This is 25 years ago, and we were thinking about carbon at the time. And so what we could do is we collected enough information. Let me think about this. We collected enough information to calculate how much carbon, how many megajoules per year this typical house would use if it was an ordinary house, and then we collected enough information. We collected the information on how much energy this house actually used, and so obviously we can see there's a delta there, and we're going to add up the deltas and then multiply by the factor of how many houses we had in Nova Scotia, and say, okay, here's how many millions of tons of carbon solar Nova Scotians are not putting in the atmosphere every year. That's a pretty cool project, don't you think?
Totally, yeah.
We never
5 years ago when nobody was really wasn't even a glint in the eye of mainstream.
Yeah, and so really, the whole organization, Chris, has not been really focused on solar per se. It's been focused on carbon emission lowering since like 1978. It hasn't been solely about energy efficiency. It hasn't been solar, entirely about solar. It's really we've been about carbon footprint since forever. And to that end, one of the original people named Don Roscoe in the 1970s was designing greenhouses, and this may not be obvious to you at all, but greenhouses are really freaking hard to build. Like a greenhouse that does not self-destruct, that works and does not self-destruct, and does not turn into an easy bake oven in August, is unbelievably difficult to design.
Really?
I know. I had no idea, but then I learned. And so this guy Don Roscoe was doing these, and in fact we created the Solar Greenhouse Design Manual back in 1979, something like that. And then Don realized that once we had the heating and cooling and heat storage and distribution problems for a greenhouse solved, a house was easy. So Don just flipped over to designing homes that, and so he also created these things called Roscoe rules. So he designed a home that, first of all, conserves energy. So these were super insulated homes. They were better than our 2000 homes in 1980. Super insulated. They did not waste a crumb of energy. So literally, if you're in BC, this makes no sense to you, but a typical home in Nova Scotia would, if you were heating it with wood, typically you would heat it with a reasonably tight home in Nova Scotia with 4 or 5 or 6 cords of wood in the winter. Don's homes had a little tiny wood stove, the size of a bread box, and that thing could keep the place toasty over winter with less than 1 quart of wood. Okay.
Wow.
So that's one thing. So conserving energy, and then they collect energy, which actually is the easy part, right? The easy part is you just put up a window on the sun. You put up a window on the south side of the house, and sun comes in. However, that doesn't heat the north side of the house, so you need a system to distribute the energy around the house. And also at night, you want your house to stay warm, so there's a storage system built into this. So anyway, This house did all of those things. There were hundreds of those built, and this was the first solar home that worked in a northern climate. This was a remarkable thing that we designed that in Nova Scotia, and that book got reprinted in multiple languages. And so we wrote a book, and the next book was all about building a house. And in theory, using that book and a home designer and an engineer, you could build your own home. Now, you can't do that anymore. This is a sad thing that we've lost. No one can build their own house anymore.
In terms of permitting and
it's not just that, but it's usually you need a chunk of money to start building the house, and like bridge financing, right? And the upshot is you can't get a loan or a mortgage on a house that you're building yourself. It's impossible. So if you've got a big block of money, right? How much is the house going to cost you? It's going to cost you, land going to cost you, say $100,000. House going to cost you $150,000. Unless you have that in the bank, you're going to need to get a loan, and you can't do that anymore if you're building a house yourself. It's sad. And in fact, to make things worse, in the 1970s, CMHC used to actually help you do this, right? They would have there's a subdivision here in just outside of Halifax that everybody who lived in the subdivision, they built it. So there was a plumber living there, and he did the plumbing for all the houses in that house, and people learned how to be plumbers and carpenters and finished carpenters and bricklayers. And it must sound, Chris, to you like a utopian dream of people, of a whole community of people building their own homes, right? But we did it. We did it because it was allowed and because CMHC supported it.
Yeah,
Now,
no, that's cool.
now not so much.
No,
Anyway,
yeah.
so we wrote this book called, I think I have a copy of it here. No, I don't. I loaned them all out and someone didn't return them. Grr.
I mean, it's great because that speaks to, how Solar Nova Scotia came to be, right? It was a group of people with a common goal in mind, and not necessarily just solar PV, but how can we do this better? How can we lower our carbon footprint? How can we build a home better? Which really is solar PV. It's, how are you doing it better? How are you trying to live a better life?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's part of it. But Chris, I've worked with these people my whole life, and of course, in my head, they're in categories. And there's this huge chunk of just people who are idealists and just want to make the world a better place, and they want to leave the world a better place for their children. And if you say here's a way you can do it, people will pay attention to that.
And I completely agree, and it's great that I think more and more of the population is heading that way. The great thing, and I think part of the reason we can't deny that solar PV specifically is having a boom right now, is because financially it makes sense. And as much as we want to deny it, the world does rely on or revolve around money, and so I think that's part of the big boom. But it's so refreshing to hear that perspective, that is still a motivating factor for Solar Nova Scotia and people in general.
Well, when I was doing sales, of course, when you do sales, as soon as you walk into someone's house, you try to figure out which of the boxes people fit into. And so, as you said, there's a bunch of people who are just interested in it financially, and then you say, okay, well, let's calculate the years for the return on investment for this thing. And next group of people, in terms of numbers, I would say are the idealists. Who are like, I want to make the world a better place. I want to show my grandchildren that I am doing my part so that the earth is not burning by the time they are adults.
Yeah.
And that's a chunk of people, Chris, and they're charming people. And you can see these are the same people that were these beautiful, not hippie-like, but beautifully idealistic people who supported Solar Nova Scotia for so long before the switch flipped and we became and PV became practical. Third group of people are people who hate the utilities and want to give at least the least amount of money possible to the utilities, which is, look, Chris, if that's your motivation and I'm selling you something, that's a great motivation.
Yeah, totally.
I hate the utilities too.
Well, and speaking of Nova Scotia, your rates are going up, what, 14% over 2 years or something?
And they'll always go up. They'll always go up. And so, it's like, yeah, absolutely. Oh, those utilities are gouging you. Yeah, okay, this is me with my sales hat on. And the fourth group of people, Chris, are crazy. The crazy people. And God bless their souls. Crazy people with deep pockets. They're lovely customers. I had a customer. No, this wasn't a customer. This is someone who built their own solar home, which was insanely well insulated. It was a double wall, 2 independent walls. It has a funny name. I can't remember what it is. With space in between them, thermal storage, geothermal heat being drawn into the house, and the reason was that he was allergic to 60 cycle current, And his partner was alert, couldn't sleep in a home with an open flame.
Wow.
Okay, so no electricity
Yeah.
and no flame inside the house. So what did the house have to do? The house had to stay warm on the coldest, windiest nights of a Nova Scotia winter, which is pretty cold and windy, and it did.
Yeah.
He bragged. He bragged that on a cold night, on a say a -10 or -15 night, that the temperature of the house would drop 1 degree from sundown to sunup.
Hmm.
So
Wow.
anyway, I can tell you lots of more stories about lots more eccentric people, but God bless the eccentric people with deep wallets
I
because they help technology happen.
There you go. Your point of view, Dan, talking with Dan MacKay from Solar Nova Scotia, Secretary and Board Member. What gets you excited about lowering your carbon, if that's what it is, or solar PV? Why do you keep doing what you're doing, other than the burger and beers with the good people?
It's just a good thing to do, Chris. I'm in the leave the planet in a better place than I entered it, school. And so there's got to be, we've done that. We've done this huge, great job of it. We've educated tens or hundreds of thousands of people over the 40 years. We have shown people that it is practical and enjoyable to live, not necessarily off grid, but with an extremely low carbon footprint. We had this fantastic, we had a huge solar conference in Halifax 20 years ago. Solar Nova Scotia ran this thing. It was called Rise and Shine 2000. It was the Canadian National Solar Conference that year, and there was one of the speakers was telling us about being off grid, and he said, like, you still have to have a nice life. You and your partner and your kids have to have a nice life. You can't, if you need to blow your hair dry for 15 minutes every morning with an electric hair dryer, in order to have a nice day, you can't say, no, you can't do that. All right. You have to figure out what system you need to have a nice life. You can't be miserable in the name
Right.
of solar. So, and of course he was bald. So he said, like, for me, it's not that big an issue. But we, so those are the two things. And one of the elements of the Don Roscoe homes is that they fit your lifestyle, and they fit. So every single Don Roscoe home is built for the client, with the client's needs. And so, for instance, but they have certain principles. They're all built for the clients to be there until they die, which might sound a bit grim, but what that means is that wall switches and doorknobs are all at rolling height, not at walking height, right? Because at some point,
Oh, yeah.
the buildings all have everything that you need on the ground floor, which is accessible if you're if you're rolling. And they are always 2 stories, but the idea is that someone's going to be living with you who can go up and down stairs. And so, and they all fit the lot that they're put on. And generally, we would encourage people to find a south-facing lot, so that a south-facing lot with a really beautiful view. Which you might say, well, that's kind of a tall order, but you know what? In Nova Scotia, we have an awful lot of property that faces south, looks gorgeous over a lake or or the ocean itself. And one of the things that we built into it, just so that you get a sense of kind of integration of things, is that if you have a lake to the south of you, you'll get solar energy coming from the sun, obviously, but you'll also get a bounce of UV off the lake onto your house.
The bounce effect.
And so you collect, not twice, but you collect another huge chunk of energy from that. So not only do you get this really great view, but you also get another chunk of energy coming into the house, which then has to be stored. Otherwise, if it's not stored, A, house gets cold at night, B, house overheats during the day.
There you go. I had on our last podcast a gentleman from Iqaluit, and he talked about people do not think about the snow bounce, is what he called it.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Snow bounce being you're getting a lot of light bouncing off that snow, which is contributing to your winter production.
Right. And so we can see that there's certain circumstances where double-sided PV panels are extremely practical.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, well, Dan, I mean, the future of Solar Nova Scotia, you guys are going to continue growing, and what does that look like from your perspective?
Well, one of the things that we've been for quite a few years, probably 10 or 15 years anyway, is we have published a directory of solar installers. So it's membership in Solar Nova Scotia is very, very inexpensive. And so anyone who is selling anything solar related or energy lowering related, or carbon emission lowering related, can be a member, and go to our website solarns.ca, and you can enter what you're looking for and your geographic area, and an extremely clever database, online database.
I wonder who was behind that.
Extremely clever database will show you only companies that sell that thing in that, well, it's organized by county, sell that thing in that county. So we've been doing that for a very long time, and that's been, one of the services that we give to our corporate members, this ability for people to find them. I think, and the other thing that we've been doing a lot is we've been doing advocacy. It turns out, actually, this is me just thinking out loud. It turns out that doing advocacy and doing things that are good for installers, for the industry, also turns out to be a great thing for all of the government policies and stuff that we would be lobbying for that are good for installers are also good for the public. And so, for most of our history, we've been mostly a domestic solar user organization, and being an industry or association really is not such a distraction from that.
Yeah, wonderful. So the future looks bright. Hey,
bet that's the first time you said that on the air today.
No kidding. Hey. Yeah, well, I mean, it's great that we have Solar Nova Scotia. Obviously, our major sponsor is Shift, and they're an installer. And of course, for every installer in Nova Scotia, what the work you're doing is paving a way for them to be able to help people and help speed up the transition and move people along that adoption curve, so that solar will one day just be mainstream. And 5 years from now, it'll just be on newly built homes. And so you guys have paved the way. You've been a part of that ever since that first meeting at that pub, when you thought, hey, these people are cool, I'm going to stick around. So thank you for doing that work, and thank you for joining the Solar PV Cast. I feel like we covered some great things, and I feel like there's a few more episodes in our future.
Absolutely are, Chris. I would encourage you to talk to some of the other pioneers who have absolutely fascinating perspectives on things.
And that fourth category, we got to get someone from the crazy on, as you said.
Oh, I can give you some references.
Dan, thank you very much for joining the Solar PV Cast today.
My pleasure.
The Solar PV Cast by Shift with Chris Palliser. To begin your solar journey, visit shift.ca.